Hi, I'm Nick, and I'm here to help you master building applications in Laravel and PHP. Let's talk about the strategy design pattern and how we might implement this in PHP and in Laravel. In the example we're going to use various payment methods. So if someone was going to pay, they might use a credit card, they might use Apple Pay, and they might use Google Pay. So let's get to it. All right, let's talk about what the strategy design pattern is. In this example where we're going to have multiple payment strategies, this is kind of how we can outline it. So we're going to have an interface called payment method, and then we're going to have different strategies that implement that interface. So we're going to have a credit card strategy, an Apple Pay strategy, and a Google Pay strategy. Now, each of these things has to implement this pay method. But what's going to happen is they're each going to do their own thing. Apple's going to reach out to Apple, Google Pay is going to reach out to Google, and the credit card one would reach out to any of the credit card providers to help the payment go through. And then we've also got this strategy context over here. This strategy context is what goes ahead and gets us one of these strategies. It's important because our job and our controller will rely on this strategy context here. And since all of our strategies implement a common interface, the code inside the strategy context will all be the same. And that's very important because the job of the controller have no idea which strategy that they're given, nor do they care. But the important part is that they're given something that implements that payment method interface. All right, let's go ahead and start building this. In this case, we're going to use a job in order to kind of kick things off. It's going to be really simple. And what we're just going to do is we're going to return like credit card for the credit card strategy. We're going to return Apple Pay for the pay, and then Google Pay for the pay method here. So first, let's create our job. In order to create our job, Laravel has some nice built-in commands to go ahead and create this. Go ahead and make our console command. So it's going to be PHP artisan make command. We can give it a name. So this is just going to be payment strategy command. This name really isn't all that relevant. All right, so we've got, go ahead and create that. All right, now we've got our command. I'm going to change the signature. I'm just going to change it to pay. And then I'm going to specify that, let's say you were running this command and you have to specify a payment method. In Laravel, this is what it means that this parameter is required. So this is going to say display the payment method strategy that is used. All right, so now we've got our command. What we should do now is we should create our interface. So inside of our app folder, I'm going to create just a payment methods directory. And in here, I'm going to create an interface called payment method. And this payment method must have a pay method on it. And we're going to say all of them need to return a string. So let's go ahead and create our various different payment methods. So let's create our credit card one. And I'm going to name this credit card strategies just to cement this in our brains that these are the various strategies that we can use. And we're going to say this needs to implement the payment method. Now this is red here because we haven't implemented the pay function yet. So for this one, we're just going to say return credit card. For our next one, let's create the Apple Pay. Again, this one has to implement payment method interface. And we must return a string. And then for the last one, Google Pay. And this one must return Google Pay. All right, so now each of our strategies, let's recap what we just did. We've created an interface, and we've said any payment method that implements this interface must have a pay function on it. Now we've got three of these, three different strategies, and they each return pretty much just their name. So now what we need is we need something that will give us back one of these strategies when we want to go ahead and do something. So that's what that payment strategy context is. So let's go ahead and create that payment strategy context. And so this payment strategy context is going to have a private class variable that implements the payment method interface, and we're going to name it strategy. That's going to be the strategy that's being used. We're going to declare a constructor. And when you create a payment strategy context, you need to give it which payment method you want to use. And so now what we need to do is we need to set this variable here, strategy, based on what somebody passes into here. So somebody, for example, let's just say if they wanted to do credit card, they would pass in credit card. If they want to do Apple Pay, they would pass in Apple Pay. And if they want to do Google Pay, they would pass in Google Pay. So we need to build that here. So this strategy equals, and I'm going to use the match function here. I think this is a good use of the match function. We're going to say match on the payment method. And if someone passes in credit, we're going to give back a new credit card strategy. And if someone passes in Apple, we're going to give back a new Apple Pay strategy. And likewise for Google. And then if none of them match, we're going to pass back a default, and it's going to say that we're going to throw a new invalid argument exception. And we're going to say you must pass in either credit, Apple, or Google as the payment method. So now that we've got the constructor, now we need a place to actually use this payment strategy context. And the other thing that we have to do is declare a pay function on here. So now we can do return this strategy. And remember, this strategy is a payment method interface. So we're using the interface. So when people are talking about, if you've heard the term like, programming to an interface, this is what they're referring to. Because we've declared that the strategy is the interface, so now I can just do pay. And so I'm guaranteed to get one of these three, because if I don't, it's going to throw a new exception here. So now let's go ahead in that job or that command that we created. Let's go ahead and use this. And we're going to add the return type here. So in this command, we can say we're going to have a context and we need to declare the new context. So, and what we're going to say is that we're going to pass in whatever argument is passed in from the command line here. So this info, strategy context, pay, and remember the pay function is going to return the method that was actually used. All right, let's talk about what's going on here and the important part of this. The important part is that this command does not know about any of the specific strategies that are being used here. It's simply relying on this payment strategy context and then the interface that is within it. So this has no idea about Apple Pay, Google Pay, or credit card. And if we ever wanted to add more strategies, we can. The beautiful part about that is we won't have to update this code. Again, that's very important because we're updating only very specific parts of the code, and there's less risk in the rest of the code base for messing something else up. So let's go ahead and try this on the command line and see if this works. So the first thing I'm going to do is give it something that doesn't exist. Notice how we get the invalid argument exception. You must pass in either credit, Apple, or Google as the payment method. All right, let's go ahead and try credit. Notice how it says credit card. Let's add just a little bit to this and say, this was paid with the following payment method. Let's try Apple. This was paid with the following payment method, Apple Pay. And then Google. Again, the point that I want to make here that's very important is that this command doesn't know or will not change if we're adding more strategies. Let's briefly look at this diagram again so we can look at what we just built. So we've got the job, we've got the controller that's relying on this strategy context, which in turn, this strategy class property relies on this interface. Now this interface is what has the different strategies under it and is what is given back to as the strategy. So again, if we were using this as a controller, event listener, etc., that code would not change, and we're simply relying on our payment strategy context. This type of pattern can be used in many different ways for many different purposes. I thought this was a good example of how we could potentially use, different kinds of strategies, because most people, this occurs in their everyday life, whether they're paying with their phone or they're paying with a credit card online. Some other uses might be for two-factor verification. So if we've got code in the controller to handle two-factor verification, well, some people might be verifying with Google Authenticators, some might be verifying with Microsoft, some might be with SMS, and others with email. But ultimately, the code in the controller should rely on something like this, the context, and an interface, and not directly on one of those strategies. This will really up your game when you're working with the interfaces instead of, direct concrete code for in your code. So I highly recommend using these types of strategies when you start noticing these kinds of patterns in your applications. I hope you found this video useful, and if you found it useful, please like, comment, and subscribe, as I'm looking to do more design patterns in the future. So if you're interested in seeing more design patterns in the future, drop a comment below, and I'm happy to work on that video.